Hey, good morning, folks. It's Pastor Stephen back again with another No Frills Daily Devotional. And today's video is titled Stopping Short. All right. And if you watched a video that I did recently titled The Follow Through, this is kind of a continuation of that concept. And so if you haven't watched that episode, no big deal, but I would encourage you to check that one out as well. All right. And in that video, the follow through, I was trying to pick at at this question, why do you follow Jesus? And really trying to tease that idea out because I want to make sure that you and I are following Jesus for the right reason. Because a lot of times I think people follow Jesus or start following Jesus because they think that he's going to make their life better. Okay. But then at the first sign that your life isn't becoming better, it's easy to say, well, that didn't work and walk away from him. Right. And I don't want us to desert Jesus when life becomes difficult. All right. He is the path of salvation. That's why we need to follow him, because following Jesus will likely lead us to suffering. All right. If you've watched any of my videos, you've probably heard me talk about that a lot. But following Jesus will likely lead us to suffering, because if you read about his life in the Gospels, it led to suffering, right? Think about the crucifixion. That's a lot of suffering going on, folks, right? All right. But keep following him, right? Keep following him, even though it's likely that his life will lead us to suffering. Keep following him, because if we keep following him, he is going to lead us through it. All right. Now, where does this idea of stopping short come from, right? Because I don't want us to stop short. All right. That's kind of the big message today. Don't stop short. And I was thinking about it like this in terms of like a sports analogy. Something I coached football for many years. Okay. And I always worked with my quarterbacks on their follow through, making sure that they don't short arm their throws. Okay. Or maybe you're a basketball person. All right. And so when you teach somebody to shoot a basketball, you talk about the follow through. All right. And so you want to make sure that people aren't short arming, or in tennis, if you're weird and you play tennis, right? The follow through is so important. Why? Because it affects the trajectory. When my quarterbacks stop short with their arm, or a basketball player stops short with their shot, or a tennis player stops short with their racket, it affects the trajectory. Okay. And I want to make sure that we aren't affecting the trajectory of our lives in a negative way. All right. We need to stop stopping short in our walk with Jesus. All right. That kind of sounded like a tongue twister there, but we need to stop stopping short in our walk with Jesus. The follow through is important. All right. And I'm going to show you that in scripture. I'm going to take you to Hebrews today. And this is chapter 4. And I'm going to read verses 1 and 2 to you today. And I'll try to explain what the author of Hebrews is saying here. And so he writes this. He says, "Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it." Key phrase there. "For we also have had the gospel preached to us just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them, because those who heard it did not combine it with faith." And so what the author of Hebrews is talking about here is he's talking about the trajectory of the lives of the Israelites before him. And he's talking about how they often got into these cycles of disobedience. They were in the promised land, but then they got kicked out of the promised land, right? They obeyed to get into the promised land, but then they stopped obeying, and then they got out of the promised land. And I just finished up talking a lot about that in my videos from the book of Jeremiah, right? And it's this idea that the Israelites were always in this state of partial obedience, or they were always in this state of partial surrender. And what the writer of Hebrews is getting at here is we can't live our lives in partial obedience, and we can't live our lives in partial surrender. We need to stop stopping short, right? That's the phrase that he said there. None of them, or let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. Okay? They kept stopping short. They kept getting into these cycles of partial obedience and partial surrender. And what's happening is because they were stopping short, it was changing their trajectory time and time again. And it was affecting their trajectory of their lives in the negative, okay? Where they weren't experiencing the full rest of God. And I wrote myself a note here that full rest, I wrote it right in my Bible here, is peace and completeness as a result of obedience, right? They weren't experiencing the peace that the promised land was meant to provide for them and the rest that the promised land was to provide for them because they were stopping short. They were only partially obeying and partially surrendering, all right? You've probably heard me say that enough. Move on, Stephen, right? But it's time for you and I, okay? Let me land the plane a little bit. It's time for you and I to put our faith and our trust in Jesus alone. That's what the author of Hebrews is talking about here at the end of verse 2, because he says those who heard it, they heard the gospel, they heard the message of Jesus, but they did not combine it with faith. And what does that word faith mean? It means full trust, full surrender of all my thoughts and all my expectations. I'm just going to surrender it all to you, Jesus, and I'm going to trust you no matter what life starts to look like. I'm going to be all in, okay? No more partial obedience, no more partial surrender. I'm going to put my faith and trust in you alone, Jesus, because Jesus is the way of salvation. I'm going to follow you for the right reasons because you are the way of salvation. And when I surrender to him, okay, when I surrender my life to him and I stop living in partial obedience, he's going to change the trajectory of my life, but he's going to change it for the good, you guys. Hey, have an awesome, awesome day and be blessed.